The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows across the marble floor as Maya Rodriguez dragged her mop bucket through the pristine lobby of Sterling Corporate Tower. It was nearly midnight, and the building that buzzed with power and ambition during the day now stood empty, except for her. Her uniform hung loose on her tired frame. The polyester fabric faded from countless washes. The rubber gloves on her hands were worn thin, and beneath them, her palms were raw with blisters that had formed over months of scrubbing, mopping, and cleaning up after people who made more in a day than she earned in a year. Maya had been working double shifts for 3 weeks straight. Her daughter's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and the collection notices piling up on her kitchen table were a constant reminder that falling behind was an option. So here she was, at Sterling Corporate Tower, making sure every surface gleamed for the executives who would stride through these doors tomorrow morning without giving her a second glance. As she wrung out her mop, voices echoed from the elevator bank. Maya froze. The building was supposed to be empty, except for security and cleaning staff. She pressed herself against a marble pillar, hoping to remain invisible. The Henderson merger's everything, one voice said, sharp with urgency. If Richardson pulls this off, he'll cement his legacy. But if it falls through, he's finished. Another voice completed. 20 years building this company, and it all comes down to one deal. Maya held her breath as footsteps clicked across the lobby. She caught glimpses of expensive suits and confident strides, the kind of people who belonged in this world of glass and gold. The board's getting nervous, the first voice continued. Word is, if Richardson can't close this by Friday, they're considering a change in leadership. The voices faded as the elevator doors closed, carrying the executives to whatever floor housed their important decisions. Maya exhaled slowly. She'd heard the name Richardson before. Everyone who worked in the building knew he was a CEO, though she'd never seen him. To people like her, he was just a name on the company directory, as distant and untouchable as the stars outside these towering windows. She returned to her work, the rhythmic swish of the mop against marble almost meditative. But as she rounded the corner near the executive elevator, her world tilted. Maya's mop bucket caught on the wheel, sending dirty water cascading across the polished floor just as the elevator doors opened. A man stepped out, his attention focused on his phone, and walked directly into the spreading puddle. Time slowed. The man looked down at his pristine Italian leather shoes, now soaked with grimy water. His expression shifted from surprise to disgust to something colder. Maya scrambled to her knees, grabbing towels from her cart. I'm so sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. Let me? Don't. His voice cut through her apologies like ice. Just don't touch anything else. Maya looked up from the floor, taking his perfectly tailored suit, his steel gray hair, and eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. He wasn't shouting, but somehow his quiet contempt felt worse than if he had. Do you have any idea what these shoes cost? He asked, his voice deadly calm. More than you make in a month, I guess. Heat flooded Maya's cheeks. She kept her eyes down, frantically mopping up the water. I can pay for cleaning, sir. I can... With what? He stepped around the puddle, careful not to let his other shoe get wet. Just be more careful. Some of us have important work to do. He walked away without another word, leaving Maya alone on the marble floor with her shame and her dirty mop water. She finished cleaning in silence, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. It wasn't until an hour later, as she emptied trash bins on the 40th floor, that she saw him again. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive boardroom, she could make out his silhouette. He was standing at the head of a long conference table, gesturing to a presentation screen, commanding the room with the same cold authority he'd shown her. The nameplate by the boardroom entrance caught her eye. James Richardson, Chief Executive Officer. Maya's stomach dropped. The man whose shoes she'd ruined, the man who'd made her feel smaller than the dirt she cleaned up, he was the CEO. The same CEO whose career hung in the balance over some merger, whose every decision shaped the lives of thousands of employees. She pressed her face closer to glass, watching him move with practiced confidence among people in suits that cost more than her rent. Up there, in that world of leather chairs and million-dollar deals, he was king. Down here, 40 floors below in the same building, She was invisible. Two worlds, one building. And Maya Rodriguez had just discovered exactly where she stood in James Richardson's universe. But as she turned away from that glittering boardroom and walked back to her cart, something shifted inside her. The humiliation burned, yes, but beneath it, something else was growing, something that felt dangerously like determination. Because Maya Rodriguez wasn't done with James Richardson, not by a long shot. And she was about to discover that sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one sitting at the head of the table. It's the one everyone overlooks, the one who sees everything, the one who has nothing left to lose. The game was about to change. Richardson just didn't know it yet. Maya's alarm buzzed at 5 a.m., the same harsh sound that had pulled her from sleep for the past 3 years. She rolled over in the narrow bed, her back aching from hours of bending and scrubbing, and looked at the stack of bills on her nightstand. Rent notice, final notice, past due. Her daughter Sophia was still asleep in the bed they shared in their studio apartment. Her breathing labored even in rest. The cystic fibrosis treatments were working, but they came with a price tag that made Maya's stomach turn every month. Insurance covered some of it, but some was never enough. Maya dressed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, kissing Sophia's forehead before heading to her first job of the day, cleaning offices before the real world woke up. By the time she finished her morning shift and caught 2 buses to reach Sterling Corporate Tower for her evening work, she'd been on her feet for 10 hours. But Maya had become a master at being invisible. People looked right through her as she emptied their trash, cleaned their coffee spills, and restocked their supply closets. She moved like a ghost through their world of power lunches and corner offices, hearing everything, seeing everything, forgotten the moment she left the room. Meanwhile, 40 floors above her world, James Richardson was reshaping industries with the stroke of a pen. In the executive suite, Richardson commanded respect through sheer intellectual force. He could analyze market trends others missed, spot weaknesses in competitor strategies, and negotiate deals that left seasoned veterans speechless. Board members hung on his every word. Competitors studied his every move. But respect born from fear isn't the same as loyalty. His assistant scheduled his days in 15-minute increments, terrified of wasting his time. Department heads practiced their presentations for weeks before facing him, knowing he could dismantle their proposals with a single question. Even senior vice presidents approached his office like soldiers walking into battle. Richardson didn't just run Sterling Corporate. He was Sterling Corporate. Cold, efficient, untouchable. 3 days after their collision in the lobby, fate decided to shuffle the deck again. Maya was working late, as usual, when she heard raised voices from the executive floor. She'd been emptying wastebaskets near the boardroom when the doors burst open and Richardson stormed out, his jaw tight with frustration. Behind him trailed a group of nervous-looking people in expensive suits, clutching folders and tablets. In his haste, Richardson dropped a thick manila folder. Paper scattered across the marble floor like fallen leaves, and Maya watched the executives freeze, unsure whether they should help or maintain their distance. Maya didn't hesitate. She knelt down and began gathering the documents, her movements quick and efficient. As she handed the folder back to Richardson, her eyes caught something on one of the charts. "Sir," she said quietly, then stopped herself. What was she doing? This wasn't her place. Richardson noticed her hesitation. "What?" Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm sorry, it's just this number here." She pointed to a figure on the financial projection. Shouldn't it match the quarterly report from last month? Because this shows Henderson Company's debt at $2.3 billion, but I remember seeing $2.8 billion when I was cleaning Mr. Peterson's office. The silence that followed was deafening. Richardson stared at her, then at the document, his expression unreadable. Behind him, 25 of the most expensive consultants in the city shifted uncomfortably. "You read financial reports?" Richardson asked. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. Sometimes I see papers when I'm cleaning. I don't mean to pry, I notice things." Richardson studied the chart, his brilliant mind already calculating the implications of the discrepancy. If the janitor was right, his entire approach to the Henderson merger was based on flawed data. If she was wrong, he just wasted precious time listening to cleaning staff. Peterson. He called to one of the suits behind him. Check this against last month's Henderson report. Now. The next few minutes stretched like hours. Maya stood frozen, clutching her cleaning supplies, while some of the most powerful people in corporate America waited for a verification that could change everything. Peterson's face went pale as he checked his tablet. She's correct, sir. The debt figure is wrong. If Henderson's actual debt is $2.8 billion instead of $2.3, then our entire valuation model is off by $500 million, Richardson finished. He looked at Maya with something that might have been curiosity. What's your name? Maya Rodriguez, sir. Without warning, Richardson turned toward the boardroom. Ms. Rodriguez, you're coming with us. The consultants exchanged glances as Maya followed Richardson into the room she'd only seen through glass. The boardroom was even more intimidating up close, a cathedral of capitalism with leather chairs that probably cost more than Maya's annual salary. Richardson took his place at the head of the massive table, his presence commanding even in a room full of Harvard MBAs and McKinsey consultants. Maya stood awkwardly by the door, acutely aware of her cleaning uniform among the sea of tailored suits. Ladies and gentlemen, Richardson announced, you spent the last 3 hours giving me polished presentations about Henderson Company's potential, but our cleaning staff just identified a fundamental error in your analysis. His gaze swept the room. So here's a question for all of you. If Henderson's debt is actually $2.8 billion, not $2.3 billion, how does that change our acquisition strategy? Hands shot up. Voices launched into complex analyses filled with industry jargon and theoretical frameworks. Richardson listened with growing impatience as consultant after consultant delivered rehearsed responses that sounded impressive but said nothing new. Finally, his eyes landed on Maya, still standing by the door. Ms. Rodriguez, you seem to notice things others miss. What do you think? Maya's mouth went dry. Every eye in the room was on her. These people had degrees from schools she'd never even dreamed of attending. They spoke an acronym she didn't understand and referenced concepts she'd never studied. But Richardson was waiting, and something in his expression suggested this wasn't a cruel joke. He actually wanted her answer. I don't know anything about business, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But when I was growing up, my grandmother always said that if someone owes you money and they're already struggling to pay, lending them more just makes the hole deeper. Maybe instead of trying to buy Henderson, you could help them fix their problems first. That way, when you do buy them, you're getting something strong instead of something broken. The room fell silent. Maya could feel her face burning with embarrassment. What had she just said? These people were talking about billion-dollar deals, and she just offered advice her grandmother might have given about lending money to neighbors. But Richardson was leaning forward, his cold eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. Interesting, he said slowly. Instead of an acquisition, you're suggesting a partnership. Help them stabilize, then acquire from a position of strength rather than desperation. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak again. Richardson looked around the room at the 25 consultants who'd been competing for his attention all day. Then his gaze returned to Maya, and for the first time since she'd known him, something almost like approval flickered in his expression. Ms. Rodriguez, he said, take a seat. As Maya sank into a leather chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, one question echoed in her mind, and maybe in yours too. What do you think matters more in life? Polished qualifications or raw honesty? Because in a room full of people who had spent decades learning how to say the right thing, sometimes the most powerful voice belongs to someone who simply tells the truth. And Maya Rodriguez was about to discover that honesty, in the right moment, can be the most dangerous weapon of all. The whispers started the very next day. Did you hear about the janitor who thinks she's a consultant? Richardson's lost his mind, asking cleaning staff for business advice. I heard she doesn't even wear shoes half the time. Maya tried to ignore the stares and hushed conversations that followed her through Sterling Corporate Tower's gleaming halls. But when you're already invisible to most people, suddenly becoming visible for all the wrong reasons felt like being under a microscope. The nickname the Barefoot Janitor spread to the building like wildfire. It wasn't entirely unfair. Maya often slipped off her worn sneakers during late-night cleaning sessions when her feet swelled from 14-hour workdays. What they didn't know was that those shoes had holes in the soles, and sometimes bare feet on cold marble felt better than wet socks. But Richardson had asked her to assist him informally with the Henderson merger. So every evening after finishing her regular cleaning duties, Maya found herself in the surreal position of sitting in executive meetings, her janitor's uniform a stark contrast to the sea of tailored suits around her, and she was making mistakes. Big ones. On her third day, she accidentally filed confidential merger documents in the wrong cabinet, sending Richardson's assistant into a panic. The following Tuesday, she knocked over Richardson's coffee during a video conference with the Henderson CEO, sending hot liquid cascading across financial projections that had taken weeks to prepare. Each mistake felt like confirmation that she didn't belong in this world. Maya could feel the judgment radiating from executives who barely acknowledged her existence before and now viewed her as a threat to the natural order. But the harshest criticism came from someone who saw her as exactly that, a threat. Victoria Steele, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development, had been Richardson's right hand for 8 years. She climbed the corporate ladder through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an unwavering commitment to maintaining her position at the top of Sterling corporate hierarchy. Victoria had survived 3 CEO transitions, 2 major scandals, and countless ambitious colleagues who thought they could outmaneuver her. She was not about to be displaced by a janitor. "James," Victoria said, her voice silk wrapped around Steele as she cornered Richardson after a board meeting. "The Henderson merger is the most important deal in Sterling's history. Don't you think it deserves seasoned leadership?" Richardson didn't look up from his tablet. "Ms. Rodriguez brings a unique perspective. Ms. Rodriguez spilled coffee on our quarterly projections yesterday," Victoria replied coolly. "And last week, I heard her trying to explain market volatility using analogies about her grandmother's garden. This isn't a charity case, James. It's a billion-dollar acquisition." Around the office, Victoria's campaign was more subtle but no less effective. She spread doubts about Maya's competence in carefully worded conversations. She questioned the wisdom of including support staff in strategic decisions. She made sure everyone knew that while they had advanced degrees and decades of experience, the CEO was consulting with someone whose formal education ended with high school. Maya felt the hostility like a physical weight. But she also began to notice something else. Not everyone saw her as an intruder. On a sweltering Thursday, when the building's air conditioning failed, Maya watched executives wilt in their expensive suits while maintenance claimed it would take hours to fix. Maya disappeared for 20 minutes and returned with a screwdriver, some wire, and a small fan from the supply closet. Within an hour, she jury-rigged a temporary cooling system that made the boardroom tolerable. "Where did you learn to do that?" asked Marcus, one of the younger analysts. Maya shrugged, tightening a wire connection. "When you can't afford to call repair people, you learn to fix things yourself." The following week, an angry client stormed into the office, furious about delayed contract negotiations. While executives scrambled to manage the crisis, Maya brought the man a cup of coffee and listened to his frustration about feeling ignored and undervalued. 20 minutes later, he was calm, cooperative, and apologizing for his outburst. "How did you do that?" Richardson asked later. "I know what it feels like to be invisible," Maya said simply. "Sometimes people just need someone to really see them." These small moments began to shift perceptions. Maya's humor, self-deprecating jokes about her advanced degree in floor maintenance, made even stern executives smile. Her creativity in solving practical problems impressed people who'd never had to think outside corporate protocols. Her genuine empathy for others stood out in a world where emotional intelligence often took second place to spreadsheet analysis. But it was a broken elevator that changed everything between Maya and Richardson. They'd been working late on Henderson merger documents when the elevator between the 40th and 35th floors suddenly shuddered to a halt. The lights flickered, then settled into an eerie half-glow powered by emergency systems. Richardson immediately reached for his phone, but the signal was dead inside the elevator shaft. For a man who controlled his environment down to 15-minute increments, being trapped was his worst nightmare. "Building security will notice eventually," Maya said, settling onto the floor with surprising calm. Might as well get comfortable. Richardson remained standing, his jaw tight with frustration. I have a conference call with Tokyo in 30 minutes. Well, Maya said with a slight smile, unless you got a secret helicopter on the roof, Tokyo's going to have to wait. They sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then 20. Richardson finally sank to the floor, his perfect composure cracking slightly. I hate small spaces, he admitted quietly. Maya looked at him with surprise. The almighty CEO of Sterling Corporate, afraid of being trapped? Want to talk about something else? She offered. That's when the walls began to come down. Richardson told her about growing up as an only child in a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home, about parents who measured love in achievements and accolades, about boarding schools where he learned to be brilliant but never learned to be vulnerable, about building Sterling Corporate into an empire while building walls around his heart. I can't remember the last time someone asked me how I felt instead of what I decided, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya shared her own story, not the sanitized version she gave in job interviews, but the real one, about dropping out of high school when her mother got sick, about working 3 jobs to support her family while her friends went to college, about the fear that gripped her every time Sophia had a coughing fit, wondering if this would be the time the illness won. But you know what's funny? Maya said, leaning against the elevator wall. I used to think people like you had it all figured out. Perfect lives, perfect families, perfect everything. Turns out we're all just trying not to mess up too badly. Richardson laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in Maya's presence. If only the board could see me now. Their fearless leader, trapped in an elevator with a barefoot janitor. Hey, Maya protested with mock indignation. I'm wearing shoes tonight. When the elevator finally lurched back to life 2 hours later, something fundamental had shifted between them. They weren't CEO and janitor anymore. They were James and Maya, 2 people who'd seen each other without the armor they wore for the rest of the world. But that newfound connection made Richardson's next confession even more troubling. Maya, he said as they gathered their scattered papers, I need to tell you something about the Henderson merger. The pressure from the board isn't just about closing a deal. They've given me an ultimatum. Sign Henderson by Friday, or they'll replace me as CEO. Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the elevator's temperature. But Friday's only 3 days away. Exactly. And after spending weeks analyzing Henderson's financials, I'm starting to think this merger might be a mistake. Their debt situation is worse than we initially thought, their management structure is unstable, and their core technology might be obsolete within 5 years. So don't sign, Maya said, as if it were that simple. Richardson gave her a look that was equal parts admiration and frustration. Maya, if I don't sign, I lose everything. 20 years of building this company, gone. But if I do sign, you might lose everything anyway, just more slowly, Maya finished. They stood in the hallway outside the elevator, surrounded by the trappings of Richardson's success. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, portraits of Sterling Corporate's greatest triumphs. But Maya could see the fear in his eyes, the weight of impossible choices. There's something else, Richardson said quietly. I've been getting pressure from some board members to expedite due diligence. They want me to skip certain financial audits, streamline the approval process. They say it's about seizing opportunities, but your gut tells you something's wrong, Maya said. Richardson nodded. My gut tells me something's very wrong. But I can't prove it, and I'm running out of time. As they walked toward Richardson's office, Maya felt the enormous weight of what he'd shared with her. A merger that could destroy Sterling Corporate. A CEO being pressured to make decisions that went against his better judgment. Board members who might have motivations beyond the company's best interests. Maya thought about Victoria Steele's constant undermining, about the whispers that followed her through the halls, about the precarious position she occupied in this world of power and politics. Speaking up about her concerns could cost her not just this informal consulting role, but her job entirely. And without this job, she couldn't afford Sophia's treatments. But as she looked at Richardson James, she saw something she recognized. The same trapped expression she'd worn for years, the same impossible choice between self-preservation and doing what felt right. That's when she realized the question wasn't just about the merger. It was about courage. It was about the moment when staying silent becomes more dangerous than speaking up. Would you have the courage to speak up if you noticed something wrong, even if it could cost you your job? Because Maya Rodriguez was about to discover that sometimes the biggest risk isn't losing everything you have. It's losing the chance to become everything you could be. And with only 3 days until Richardson's deadline, time was running out for both of them. Friday morning arrived with the weight of destiny. The Sterling corporate boardroom had been transformed for what everyone believed would be the most important signing in the company's history. Camera crews positioned themselves discreetly in corners to capture the historic moment. Financial reporters filled the gallery, their phones ready to break the news that would send Sterling stock soaring. Board members sat in their leather chairs like kings watching a coronation. At the head of the table sat James Richardson, immaculate in his charcoal suit, the Henderson merger document spread before him like a map to his salvation. After 20 years of building Sterling Corporate, this single signature would cement his legacy and silence his critics forever, or destroy everything he'd worked for. Maya Rodriguez wasn't supposed to be in the room, but someone had spilled coffee in the boardroom that morning, and the regular cleaning staff was occupied elsewhere. So there she was, moving invisibly along the walls with her cart, wiping down surfaces while titans of industry prepared to reshape the corporate landscape. She tried to focus on her work, but her stomach churned with each passing minute. Richardson had confided his doubts about the merger, his suspicions about the board's rush to sign. But here he was, pen in hand, about to do exactly what every instinct told him was wrong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richardson announced, his voice carrying the authority that had made him legendary. After extensive due diligence and careful consideration, Sterling Corporate is proud to move forward with the Henderson acquisition. Applause rippled through the room. Camera flashes illuminated Richardson's face as he lifted the gold-plated pen that would sign away his company's future. Maya's hands trembled as she cleaned a coffee stain near the document table. From her position, she had a clear view of the contract's final pages. Pages that most people in the room hadn't bothered to read carefully in their rush to close the deal. Her eyes caught on a paragraph buried deep in the legal language, hidden among clauses about asset transfers and operational integration. The words seemed to blur as her heart hammered against her ribs. Section 47B. Upon completion of merger, all non-essential Sterling corporate personnel shall be subject to immediate termination review, with Henderson Industries maintaining sole discretion over employment decisions. Maya's blood ran cold. This wasn't a merger. It was a takeover disguised as a partnership. Henderson wasn't buying Sterling Corporate. They were buying the right to gut it, fire its employees, and absorb its most valuable assets while discarding everything else. But there was more. Her eyes scanned frantically through the dense legal text until she found the clause that made her stomach drop entirely. Section 52A. Strategic decision-making authority shall transfer to Henderson Industries' Board of Directors within 90 days of merger completion, with Sterling corporate leadership serving in advisory capacity only. Richardson wasn't just selling his company. He was handing over control to Henderson's board, making himself and every Sterling executive powerless figureheads in their own company. And buried even deeper was a real poison, a clause giving Henderson the right to sell Sterling's assets to third parties without Sterling board approval. Maya realized with crystal clarity that someone had engineered this disaster. Someone with access to the merger documents had hidden these clauses in legal jargon, betting that Richardson's time pressure and board pressure would make him sign without catching the trap. Richardson's pen hovered over the signature line. Around the room, board members leaned forward in anticipation. Victoria Steele sat with her hands folded, her expression unreadable, but her eyes fixed on Richardson with laser intensity. Maya looked at the cleaning card in her hands, then at Richardson about to destroy everything he'd built. She thought about Sophia, about the medical bills, about the job she would certainly lose if she spoke up. Every logical cell in her brain screamed at her to stay silent, to let the powerful people make their powerful mistakes, to protect the fragile security she'd fought so hard to build. But logic wasn't the loudest voice in her head anymore. Maya took 3 steps toward the table. Every eye in the room shifted to her with confusion and growing irritation. This wasn't her world. This wasn't her place. She was supposed to be invisible. "Mr. Richardson," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, could you look at page 47, section B?" The room fell silent. Not the respectful silence of important business, but the shocked silence of a world turned upside down. A janitor had just interrupted the signing of a billion-dollar merger. Richardson looked up from the documents, his pen still poised over the signature line. "What?" Maya's heart hammered, so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "The employment clause, sir, and section 52A. I think you should read them before you sign." Victoria Steele's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. "James, this is completely inappropriate. Security should remove." "Wait," Richardson said, his eyes narrowing as he flipped to page 47. The room held its breath as he read, his expression shifting from confusion to concern to outright alarm. "What the hell is this?" Richardson's voice cut through the boardroom like a blade. "This clause gives Henderson complete authority to terminate Sterling employees without cause or consultation." Board member Harrison Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "James, those are standard integration procedures." "Standard?" Richardson's voice rose as he flipped to section 52. "This gives Henderson's board complete decision-making authority over Sterling operations. We wouldn't just be selling our company. We'd be handing them the right to destroy it." The financial reporters in the gallery began typing furiously on their phones. Camera crews zoomed in on Richardson's face as the realization of what he'd almost signed washed over him. Victoria Steele stepped forward, her composure cracking for the first time Maya had ever seen. "James, you're making a mistake. The board has already approved." The board approved what they were told this contract said. Richardson snapped. "Not what it actually says." He looked directly at Maya. "How did you catch this?" Maya's voice shook as she answered. "I've been reading merger document for weeks, trying to understand the deal. These clauses weren't in the drafts I saw before. Someone added them." The room erupted. Board members demanded explanations. Reporters shouted questions. Henderson representatives looked like they wanted to disappear through the floor. But Victoria Steele's reaction was the most telling. Instead of confusion or surprise, her face showed pure rage. The fury of someone whose carefully laid plan had just crumbled. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, her voice sharp with desperation. "We're going to let a janitor derail the most important deal in Sterling's history?" "James, sign the contract. We can negotiate modifications later." Richardson stood slowly, his eyes moving from the poisoned contract of Victoria's face to Maya's terrified but determined expression. 20 years of corporate experience crystallized into a single moment of perfect clarity. "Ms. Steele," Richardson said, his voice deadly calm, "did you review these final contract changes before today's signing?" Victoria's silence spoke volumes. Richardson turned to the Henderson representatives. "Gentlemen, this meeting is over. Sterling Corporate will not be signing this agreement." Chaos erupted. Board members shouted objections. Henderson executives demanded explanations. Victoria Steele looked like she might actually lunge across the table at Maya. But Richardson raised his hand, and his authority silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we almost made a catastrophic mistake today. Not because we lacked intelligence or experience, but because we forgot the most important lesson in business. The devil is always in the details. And sometimes the person who catches those details isn't the one with the MBA or the corner office." He looked directly at Maya, standing frozen by her cleaning cart, still holding the rag she'd been using to wipe down tables. "Sometimes it's the person who actually reads every word because she knows that details matter. The person who speaks up even when it could cost her everything. The person who reminds us that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing." Richardson picked up the contract and walked to the paper shredder in the corner of the room. The sound of pages being destroyed echoed through the stunned silence. "Meeting adjourned," he announced. "Ms. Rodriguez, could I speak with you privately?" As the room emptied amid whispers and shocked conversations, Maya realized she was shaking from head to toe. She'd just derailed a billion-dollar merger, exposed potential corporate sabotage, and probably made enemies of some of the most powerful people in the city. But she'd also discovered something about herself that she'd never known before. When the moment came to choose between safety and truth, between self-preservation and doing what was right, she'd chosen truth. The question that echoed in her mind, and maybe in yours too, wasn't whether she'd made the right choice. It was whether you would have had the courage to make the same one. Would you have spoken up in that moment, or stayed silent to protect yourself? Because Maya Rodriguez had just learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is stay quiet when you should speak up. And sometimes the most powerful voice in the room belongs to the person everyone else forgot was listening. The fallout from the failed Henderson merger was swift and merciless. Within 24 hours of Richardson shredding the contract, Victoria Steele's carefully constructed empire began to crumble. A forensic audit revealed that she'd been secretly negotiating with Henderson Industries for months, engineering the hostile takeover from within Sterling's own walls. Her motivation? Henderson had promised her Richardson CEO position once they completed their corporate coup. The board members who'd been pressuring Richardson to sign quickly distanced themselves from Victoria's scheme, claiming ignorance while privately thanking whatever forces had saved them from becoming unwitting accomplices to corporate sabotage. Victoria was escorted from the building that Friday evening, her 20-year career at Sterling ending with a security guard and a cardboard box. But the real transformation wasn't in the boardroom. It was in the quiet conversation that took place in Richardson's office after the chaos had settled. "I owe you an apology," Richardson said as Maya sat across from his desk, still wearing her cleaning uniform, still hardly believing what had transpired. "And I owe you much more than that." Maya shook her head. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Richardson. I just did what felt right. That's exactly why I owe you everything." Richardson leaned back in his chair, looking more relaxed than Maya had ever seen him. "Do you know what I've spent the last 20 years doing, Maya? Surrounding myself with people who tell me what I want to hear. People who validate my decisions and protect my ego. I built an empire, but I also built an echo chamber." He gestured toward the window overlooking the city. "You see all those buildings out there? They're full of executives just like me. Brilliant, educated, accomplished people who've forgotten the most important skill in business: listening to uncomfortable truths." Maya fidgeted with the cleaning rag still in her hands. "I'm not educated like those people, Mr. Richardson. I barely finished high school." "Education isn't just what happens in classrooms," Richardson said firmly. "You've been educated by life, by necessity, by caring for people who depend on you. That education taught you to notice details others miss, to read between the lines, to speak up when something feels wrong. That's wisdom, Maya. And wisdom is what saved this company." Over the following weeks, Richardson made good on more than just his gratitude. He offered Maya a position as special advisor for strategic oversight, a role that didn't exist before her, but was created specifically to ensure that Sterling Corporate never again fell victim to its own blind spots. Maya's first instinct was to decline. The voice in her head whispered all the familiar fears. She didn't belong in that world. She wasn't qualified. People would see her as a fraud. But then she thought about Sophia, about the night she spent calculating how to pay for treatments, about the years of feeling invisible in a world that needed her more than it knew. She thought about Richardson's words about wisdom and uncomfortable truths, and she said yes. The transformation wasn't immediate or easy. Maya enrolled in night classes to learn the business terminology that flew around conference tables like a foreign language. Richardson personally mentored her in financial analysis and strategic thinking. Some employees remained skeptical of the barefoot janitor turned advisor, but Maya's track record of spotting problems others missed quickly earned their grudging respect. More importantly, Maya's presence began to change Sterling Corporate's culture in ways no one had anticipated. Her habit of asking simple, direct questions cut through corporate jargon and forced executives to explain their strategies in plain language. Her empathy for employees at every level brought a human element to decisions that had previously been made solely on spreadsheets. But the most profound transformation was in Richardson himself. The man who had once measured his worth by the fear he inspired began to lead with curiosity instead of intimidation. He started walking the floors, talking to employees at every level, asking questions, and actually listening to the answers. He discovered that the security guard had brilliant insights about building efficiency, that the receptionist had noticed patterns in client complaints that could revolutionize customer service, that the maintenance staff understood the building systems better than engineers who designed them. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten," Richardson told Maya during one of their weekly strategy meetings 6 months after the Henderson crisis. "Leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating space for the right questions to be asked by the right people." Maya smiled, thinking of how far they both traveled from that night when she'd spilled mop water on his expensive shoes. "My grandmother used to say that the wisest person in the room is often the one who thinks they know the least." "Your grandmother was a very smart woman," Richardson said. "I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you," Maya said. "The you become, anyway." As Maya walked home that evening, not to the cramped studio apartment she'd shared with Sophia, but to the modest 2-bedroom place they could now afford thanks to her advisor's salary and health insurance, she reflected on how a single moment of courage had rewritten her entire life. Sophia was healthy, her treatments no longer a source of financial panic. Maya had respect, purpose, and a voice in decisions that affected thousands of people. But more than that, she discovered something about herself she'd never known existed. The power to change not just her own circumstances, but the world around her. The little girl who had once felt invisible had learned that visibility isn't about being seen. It's about seeing what others miss and having the courage to speak about it. At Sterling Corporate, Richardson continued to transform from a CEO who ruled through fear into a leader who guided through wisdom. His quarterly reports began including sections on employee insights and operational improvements suggested by frontline staff. His leadership philosophy became legendary in business schools. The most dangerous executive is the one who stops listening to people who disagree with them. The Henderson Industries scandal became a case study in corporate ethics, but for Maya and Richardson, it was simply the day they learned that success isn't just about wealth or power. It's about listening to voices the world ignores. Sometimes, the smallest whisper can save everything. Maya's story spread through corporate circles, not as a fairy tale about a lucky janitor, but as a reminder that wisdom exists at every level of every organization. The question isn't whether it's there. It's whether leaders have the humility to recognize it and the courage to act on it. As Maya tucked Sophia into bed that night, her daughter asked, "Mama, do you miss being invisible?" Maya smiled, remembering the woman who used to move through Sterling Corporate like a ghost, seeing everything but never seen herself. "No, Mija," she said softly. "I was never really invisible. I just hadn't found my voice yet." The moral of Maya Rodriguez's story isn't that anyone can become a corporate advisor or that every janitor has hidden business genius. It's simpler and more profound than that. In a world that often values credentials over character and position over perception, the most important voice in the room might belong to the person everyone else has forgotten to hear. What lesson do you take from this story? Do you believe one small act of courage can truly change a life? Because Maya Rodriguez proved that it can. Not through magic or luck, but through the simple, terrifying, powerful act of speaking truth when silence would have been safer. And perhaps that's a reminder we all need, that our own moment of truth is waiting, that our own voice matters more than we know, and that sometimes the most extraordinary thing we can do is simply refuse to stay quiet when we should speak up. The question isn't whether you have something important to say. The question is whether you'll have the courage to say it when the moment comes.